Get back to the library, Keith. You're doing it on.
Most people who saw The Breakfast Club in 1985 have gone back to it dozens of times since. The 5 characters, the library, that fist in the air at the end, it's all locked into memory. But even if you know every scene by heart, there's a good chance you've been missing things right there on the screen. Here are 25 small details you missed in The Breakfast Club, 1985.
Come on, fix it.
You should really fix that.
Am I a genius? No, you're an asshole.
You're a funny guy.
Fix the door, Bender.
Everyone just shh.
Detail 25. Hughes wrote the script in 2 days. John Hughes wrote the screenplay for The Breakfast Club over July 4th and 5th, 1982, a holiday weekend in roughly 2 days. Hughes was known for writing in long, concentrated stretches, and his usual pace on a script was around 4 days, which is how long Ferris Bueller's Day Off later took him. The Breakfast Club came together faster than almost anything else he produced. The dialogue has a raw, unguarded quality that matches the pace at which it was written. It reads less like a polished Hollywood script and more like something transcribed from an actual conversation between teenagers who didn't know they were being listened to. Hughes shelved the finished script for nearly 2 years before it got made, using 16 candles to prove to the studio that he could deliver a commercial film before they'd let him make something as contained and interior as this one.
It's about the size of a cigar. Do I stutter? See, this is what you get in my house. When you speak.
Detail 24. The library was built inside the school gym. The entire film was shot at Maine North High School in Des Plaines, Illinois, a school that had been closed since May 1981. When the production designer looked at the actual school library, it was too small for the cameras, the lighting rigs, and the scale the story required. The crew's solution was to build a 2-story replica of the library inside the school's own gymnasium, which gave them the height and floor space the film needed. The real library at Maine North was used as the architectural model for the design. Beyond the library set, the gymnasium housed the production offices, an editing suite, and a screening room. The entire production essentially lived inside one abandoned building. That same building was later used for interior shots on Ferris Bueller's Day Off in 1986.
Exactly 8 hours and 54 minutes to think about why you're here. Ponder the error of your way.
Detail 23. The opening David Bowie quote was found by Ali Sheedy. The film opens on a black screen with a quote, lines from David Bowie's 1971 song Changes, about adults dismissing the young. It's one of the most effective opening cards in 1980s cinema, but it wasn't John Hughes who found it. Ali Sheedy discovered the quote and brought it to Hughes herself. She later explained that she showed it to him. He thought it was exactly right and didn't say another word about it. The next time she saw it used was when she watched the finished film for the first time. "That's my proudest moment," she said, of contributing the quote. Hughes acknowledged it by crediting David Bowie in the film's end titles.
Following a broom around after shitheads like you for the last 8 years, I've learned a couple of things. I looked through your letters.
Detail 22. Rick Moranis was fired as the janitor. Before John Kapelos played Carl the janitor, Rick Moranis had the role. When production started, Moranis arrived on set with a specific interpretation of the character, one nobody had approved or discussed with him in advance. He had cut his hair short, fitted himself with gold caps on his teeth, and prepared a thick Russian immigrant accent. He came fully committed to a performance that bore no resemblance to what Hughes had written or what the producers were expecting. According to co-producer Michelle Manning, when the first footage reached executive producer Ned Tannen in Los Angeles, his reaction was immediate and furious. He called the set demanded to know what was happening, and was told that Moranis had simply arrived with his own interpretation. The accent, Tannen insisted, would pull the audience completely out of the movie and undercut everything else happening on screen around it. Hughes removed Moranis from the production within days and replaced him with John Kapelos, who played the role straight and ended up giving the janitor a real warmth and dignity that served the film well. Moranis went on to great success in many other projects. The Russian janitor never made it to the screen. Detail 21. Emilio Estevez originally auditioned for Bender. When casting began, Emilio Estevez read for the role of John Bender, the criminal, the film's most provocative character. Hughes saw something else in him. He was struggling to find anyone convincing for Andrew Clark, the athlete, and eventually asked Estevez to take that role instead. With Bender now open, Nicolas Cage was considered, but the budget wasn't large enough to accommodate his asking price at the time. John Cusack also flew out to read for the part multiple times and genuinely wanted it. Hughes ultimately went with Judd Nelson, whom he cast just before shooting began, deciding that Nelson had the specific kind of coiled, threatening energy the character required. Cusack later said it was the rejection that stayed with him longest from that period of his career.
Well, I'm free the Saturday after that. Beyond that, I'm gonna have to check my calendar.
Good, because it's going to be filled.
Detail 20. Judd Nelson wore his audition clothes in the film. Judd Nelson came to his audition wearing a specific outfit: the jeans, the flannel shirt, the army jacket. Hughes saw exactly what he needed in the way Nelson looked and moved in those clothes. When production began, rather than design a separate costume for Bender, the wardrobe department simply used what Nelson had shown up in. The clothes Nelson wore the day he got the role are the clothes John Bender wears throughout the entire film. It was the right call. The outfit feels lived in because it genuinely was.
You grounded tonight?
I don't know. My mom said I was, but my dad told me she's a blower.
Detail 19. Only 2 cast members were actually teenagers. The Breakfast Club is a film about high school students, but almost nobody in the main cast was actually in high school at the time of filming. Molly Ringwald turned 16 during production. Anthony Michael Hall also turned 16 during production. Those 2 were the only genuine teenagers among the 5 leads. Ali Sheedy and Emilio Estevez were both 22. Judd Nelson was 24 at the time of filming and the oldest of the group. The believability of the performances in a film that depends entirely on the authenticity of its teenage characters owes more to acting ability than to lived experience, at least for 3 of the 5.
In there and use the time to your advantage.
Mom, we're not supposed to study. We just have to sit there and do nothing.
Oh, mister, you figure out a way to study.
Detail 18. Anthony Michael Hall's real mother and sister played his on-screen family. At the end of the film, when the parents arrive to pick up their children, Brian's mother is played by Anthony Michael Hall's actual mother, Mercedes Hall. The girl playing Brian's sister is Hall's real younger sister, Mary Christian. Hughes included them at Hall's request, giving the final scene between Brian and his family a layer of genuine emotional familiarity that couldn't have been manufactured. Ringwald and Hall also began dating briefly during and shortly after production, one of the quieter behind-the-scenes stories from the shoot. Detail 17. John Hughes played Brian's father. The man who drives up at the end to collect Brian Johnson is John Hughes himself, making an uncredited cameo appearance as the character's father. He appears only briefly and says nothing. Hughes had a habit of slipping himself into his own films in small ways. and this one is among the most easily missed. Most viewers watching the final sequence are focused on the students, not on the adults walking to their cars. It takes a specific knowledge of what Hughes looked like in 1984 to catch it.
It's really yours. The Breakfast Club.
Detail 16, the fist pump was improvised by Judd Nelson. The closing image of the Breakfast Club, Bender walking across the football field, turning back and throwing his fist into the air as the music swells, was not in the script. Hughes had simply planned for Bender to walk away. Nelson tried several different endings to the scene, various gestures and movements, and at some point threw his fist up without consulting anyone. Everyone watching knew immediately it was right. The shot became one of the defining images of 1980s American cinema. Nelson didn't plan it. He just did it, and they kept it.
You mean you did it more than once? Sure. Are you crazy?
Honestly, she's crazy if she's screwing a shrink.
Detail 15. The heart-to-heart circle scene was entirely ad-libbed. The scene in the middle of the film where the 5 students sit on the library floor in a circle and reveal why they're in detention was not written. Hughes told the cast to improvise the whole thing. Some of what came out of that session made it into the final cut exactly as delivered. Anthony Michael Hall's line about Brian having a fake ID so he could vote came out of the improvisation and stayed in the film unchanged. The rawness of that sequence, the thing that makes it feel so different from the rest of the film, comes from the fact that it was genuinely unscripted and the actors were finding it in the moment. Detail 14, the dandruff snow was Parmesan cheese. In one of the film's most memorable small moments, Allison shakes what appears to be dandruff from her hair onto a pencil drawing she's made, letting it drift down like snow. Ali Sheedy did not actually use her own dandruff. The white flakes falling from her hair were Parmesan cheese, sprinkled by the prop department to create the effect. Sheedy did, however, actually eat the sandwich she makes in the film, the one she fills with Pixie Stix powder and Cap'n Crunch cereal instead of the bologna she throws away. That part was not a prop.
Walks into a bar with a poodle under one arm and a 2-foot salami under the other.
Detail 13. The ceiling crawl joke was improvised and has no punchline. When Bender is crawling through the air duct above the library, he entertains himself by beginning to tell a joke about a blonde, a poodle, and a 6-foot salami. Before he delivers the punchline, he falls through the ceiling tiles and the joke simply ends there, unfinished. The joke was improvised by Judd Nelson. There was no punchline written for it because no punchline existed. Nelson started a joke with no ending in mind, fell through the ceiling on cue, and the scene moved on. The dangling incomplete joke has generated guesses and fan-written endings ever since, which is exactly the kind of loose end Hughes liked leaving in his films. Detail 12, the film was shot in sequence. Unlike most productions, which shoot scenes out of order based on location logistics and scheduling needs, The Breakfast Club was filmed largely in chronological order. This was a deliberate decision that allowed the relationships between the 5 characters to evolve naturally as the actors grew more comfortable with each other. The building intimacy you see between the characters on screen mirrors, the developing chemistry among the actors themselves as the shoot progressed. By the time they were filming the emotional sequences in the second half of the film, the cast had been living together in those roles for weeks.
Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
Give you the answer to that question, Mr. Bender, next Saturday.
Detail 11, Judd Nelson. stayed in character off camera, and nearly got fired. Judd Nelson maintained the persona of John Bender even when the cameras weren't rolling. This included staying in character during breaks and, on several occasions, directing Bender's hostility toward Molly Ringwald off-set. Hughes became genuinely angry about it and came close to firing Nelson before shooting was complete. The person who intervened and saved Nelson's place in the film was Paul Gleason, the actor playing Principal Vernon, who told Hughes that Nelson was a talented actor working hard on a difficult character. Without Gleason's defense, the film would have had a different Bender, or possibly no Bender at all.
You never make me look bad in front of those kids, do you hear me? I make $31,000 a year and I've got a home, and I'm not about to throw it away on something.
Detail 10. Principal Vernon's name came from A Hard Day's Night. Richard Vernon, the bullying, pompous vice principal played by Paul Gleason, was named after an actual person. Richard Vernon was a British character actor who had a small role in A Hard Day's Night, the 1964 Beatles film. John Hughes was a dedicated Beatles fan and slipped the reference into the film as a private nod. Most American audiences in 1985 would have had no way of knowing the connection. Unless you had seen A Hard Day's Night and caught the name, it passed without comment. Detail 9. The original title was The Lunch Bunch. When John Hughes was working through early drafts and concepts for the film, the working title was The Lunch Bunch. The name he eventually used came from an unexpected source. He heard the son of a friend use the phrase, the Breakfast Club, to describe Saturday morning detention, and it stuck. It had the right combination of mundane domesticity and slight irony, and Hughes used it without changing a word. The Lunch Bunch became The Breakfast Club, which became one of the most recognizable titles in American film. Detail 8. Don't You Forget About Me was turned down by 3 artists first. Keith Forsey wrote the film's theme song specifically for The Breakfast Club. Before Simple Minds ever heard it, the song was offered to and turned down by Brian Ferry, the sophisticated British musician who had fronted Roxy Music throughout the 1970s. It was then offered to Billy Idol, who also passed, though Idol later recorded a cover of it in 2001. It was then offered to Chrissie Hynde of The Pretenders, who turned it down as well. Hynde did, however, suggest that her then-husband Jim Kerr's band might want to consider it. Jim Kerr was the frontman of Simple Minds, the Scottish rock group that had been building a following on both sides of the Atlantic through the early 1980s. Hynde's recommendation to her own husband is the reason Don't You Forget About Me became a Simple Minds song, and eventually, one of the most recognizable pieces of music from the entire decade. 3 rejections and a personal tip from a spouse determined the soundtrack of a generation. Detail 7. Simple Minds almost didn't record it either. Even after the song landed at Simple Minds, the band was not immediately enthusiastic about recording it. They had been building a serious European art rock reputation across albums like Sons and Fascination and New Gold Dream, and were concerned that recording a song written specifically for an American teen movie would undercut the artistic direction they had worked hard to establish. The song had also been written entirely outside the band. They hadn't composed a note of it. They ultimately agreed to record it more as a professional gesture than out of genuine creative excitement. The song went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1985 and stayed there for a week, becoming by far the biggest single of their entire career. It permanently changed their commercial profile in the United States and is now the song most people around the world associate with them, for better or worse, depending on who you ask.
You made available to us? We're extremely thirsty, sir.
I have a really low tolerance for dehydration.
I've seen her.
Detail 6. The cast rehearsed the entire film as a play. Before principal photography began in March 1984, Hughes had the cast rehearse The Breakfast Club in its entirety several times. Not as a film with pages of direction and blocking, but as a stage play. The single location setup made this unusual approach possible in a way it wouldn't have been for most productions. The cast spent at least 2 to 3 weeks together before any camera rolled, working through the material and getting comfortable not just with their own characters, but with each other. Hughes later said this preparation was one of the most important decisions made during the production. The actors were not strangers walking into a cold set and performing their first real interactions in front of a camera. By the time filming began, they had already lived in these relationships for weeks, and the trust and familiarity built during that period came through in every scene. The film was subsequently shot over approximately 32 days, a tight schedule for material this emotionally dense. Detail 5. Anthony Michael Hall had a growth spurt mid-production. During the shoot, Anthony Michael Hall had a noticeable growth spurt. Judd Nelson later described it with some amusement. When they started filming, Hall was shorter than Nelson. By the time they finished, Hall was taller. The production team had to work around the continuity implications, adjusting camera angles and shot selection to minimize how obvious it was. Given that the film was shot in sequence, the physical change tracks slightly through the film if you watch closely, though the crew did enough to keep it from being distracting. Detail 4. The Shermer, Illinois. Setting is entirely fictional, but based on a real place. Shermer, Illinois, the fictional Chicago suburb where The Breakfast Club takes place, appears in multiple Hughes films, including 16 Candles, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Pretty in Pink. The town doesn't exist, but it was directly modeled on Northbrook, Illinois, the real suburb where Hughes grew up and attended high school. Northbrook was originally called Shermerville, which is where the fictional name came from. Shermer Road, an actual street in Northbrook, appears in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and makes the connection explicit for anyone who knew the area. In a 1999 interview in Premiere magazine, Hughes spoke about this fictional universe directly, saying that all his characters lived in the same town and theoretically knew each other. That John Bender and Ferris Bueller and Samantha Baker from 16 Candles all existed in the same Shermer. He said that Del Griffith from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles lived 2 doors down from John Bender. Hughes was building a world, not just making individual movies, and he was doing it quietly, without calling attention to the connections in the films themselves.
See you, Brian.
See you next Saturday.
Detail 3. The janitor's yearbook photo is on the wall. Early in the film, during a brief sequence where the camera pans across the school hallway, it passes a display case containing old yearbook photos and a Man of the Year plaque from decades past. One of the photos in that display is a younger version of Carl the janitor, the same man now pushing a mop through the corridors while the students are in detention. It's a quiet visual detail that communicates something about time, about people who stay in one place while the world around them moves on, without anything in the dialogue drawing attention to it. It's there in one shot and gone, most viewers have never noticed it.
Andrew, you've got to be number one. I won't tolerate any losers.
Detail 2. The Brat Pack name came from a magazine article about Emilio Estevez. The term Brat Pack, which came to define the group of young actors associated with Hughes's films, including the full cast of The Breakfast Club, did not originate from the film itself or from anyone connected to it. It came from a June 1985 New York Magazine article written by journalist David Blum, who had been assigned to profile Emilio Estevez. Blum observed Estevez attempting to get a free ticket to an evening screening of Lady Hawk at a cinema, noticed a sense of entitlement in the young actor, and wrote a piece that characterized a loose grouping of young Hollywood actors with the phrase Brat Pack, a deliberate riff on Frank Sinatra's famous Rat Pack from the 1960s. The label attached immediately and permanently to the circle of actors who had appeared together in The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire that same year, including Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, and Demi Moore. Several members of the group later said the label irritated them significantly and felt like a way of dismissing their work rather than recognizing it. Estevez in particular pushed back against it for years, feeling that the article had reduced serious actors to a celebrity clique. It didn't matter. The name stuck and has never fully gone away.
I don't like my parents either. I mean, I don't.
Detail 1. The film was preserved by the Library of Congress. In 2016, The Breakfast Club was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as a film deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The registry selects films each year that have particular meaning to American cultural history, and inclusion is a form of official recognition that the work matters beyond its commercial life. The Breakfast Club sits alongside Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and Singin' in the Rain on that list. It earned just over $51 million worldwide against a $1 million budget. It opened at number 3 at the box office in February 1985, behind Beverly Hills Cop and Witness. Entertainment Weekly later ranked it number 1 on its list of the 50 best high school movies ever made. The Breakfast Club is one of those films where the more you look, the more you find. It was made fast, on almost no money, inside an abandoned school by a group of young actors and a director who understood teenagers better than most adults do. The details behind it are as interesting as anything on screen. If you caught a few of these before today, you were paying close attention. If not, you know where to look next time. Leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and subscribe if you want more videos like it. There's always more worth knowing.